Alexander Royce lived in a world most people could only dream of. His life was filled with luxury and opportunities that seemed almost impossible to reach for the average person. From the outside, everything about him looked perfect. He had a massive mansion, expensive cars, and a life that most people envied. But what really made his life special, at least in his mind, was the sense of control and order he maintained in every part of it. He had grown up in a modest household, learning early on the value of hard work. That determination had carried him through college, countless business ventures, and eventually to the level of success he now enjoyed. Money had never been the only goal. He wanted influence, respect, and the freedom to live life on his own terms. Over the years, he built a reputation not just for wealth, but for being extremely careful, calculated, and thoughtful about the people he allowed into his life. Trust was earned slowly, and once it was broken, it was almost impossible to regain, despite his busy schedule. Alexander believed he had found something or someone worth slowing down for. Isabella Crane had entered his life at a charity gala almost a year ago, and from the moment they met, there was something about her that caught his attention. She was elegant, confident, and seemed to understand him in a way that few people ever did. Her presence had a certain calm, a kind of quiet sophistication that made her stand out in a crowd of admirers. To Alexander, she wasn't just a beautiful face. She was smart, witty, and shared a similar vision for life. Their relationship had grown quickly, and soon Alexander found himself planning something he never thought he would: marriage. The engagement was nothing short of spectacular. He had arranged a private ceremony in his mansion, inviting only close friends and family. Everything was carefully planned, from the flowers to the menu, to ensure it reflected the life they were building together. The engagement ring he chose for Isabella was extravagant, yet tastefully done, a symbol of his commitment and admiration for her. To the outside world, Alexander and Isabella appeared to be the perfect couple. They attended high-profile events, hosted lavish dinners, were often photographed together, always looking happy and in love. Friends and business partners would often comment on how ideal they seemed for one another. Alexander felt proud, and for a while he allowed himself to believe that his life had reached a new level of completeness. But beneath the surface, there were small, subtle signs that things weren't entirely as they seemed. Maria had worked for Alexander for nearly a decade. She was not just a maid, but a trusted part of the household, someone who had seen him through various stages of his life and knew him better than most. Her role went far beyond cleaning or maintaining the mansion. She managed schedules, coordinated events, and often noticed details that escaped even Alexander's sharp eyes. Over the years, she had developed a keen sense of intuition about people, a sort of sixth sense that had saved Alexander from potential pitfalls more than once. It was Maria who first noticed that Isabella wasn't always as forthcoming as she appeared. At first, it was small things: a phone call that ended abruptly when Maria entered the room, or a hurried step down a hallway when she thought no one was watching. These were easy to dismiss as minor quirks, but over time the pattern became harder to ignore. Maria had learned to trust her instincts. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Isabella than she revealed. Alexander, on the other hand, was blissfully unaware. He was caught up in the excitement of his engagement, enjoying the idea of spending the rest of his life with someone he admired so much. He appreciated Isabella's attention, her laughter, and the way she seemed to light up his world in subtle, meaningful ways. He trusted her completely, believing that she had chosen him for who he was, not for what he had. Despite the outward perfection, there were moments that made Maria uneasy. She noticed Isabella's habit of closing doors carefully, almost obsessively, or the way she would glance at certain corners of the house as if checking for something. There was a meticulousness in her behavior that seemed a little too precise, a little too rehearsed. Maria had seen people hide things before, small secrets that could grow into much larger problems if left unchecked. Her years of experience had taught her to pay attention to these signs. One evening, Alexander hosted a small gathering at the mansion. Friends came to congratulate the couple on their engagement. The night was filled with laughter, fine dining, and casual conversations. Isabella was charming, as always, moving gracefully among the guests, making everyone feel welcome. But during a quiet moment, Maria noticed her slip away from the main room and head toward the basement. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but enough to make Maria's curiosity spike. She had a sense that Isabella's interest in the basement wasn't ordinary. Later that night, after the guests had left and Alexander had retired to his study, Maria found herself lingering near the basement door. She hesitated, knowing that she should respect the privacy of the adults in the house. But something about the earlier moment tugged at her. There was a tension in the air, subtle yet unmistakable, that suggested the mansion held more than its fair share of secrets. She made a mental note to watch more closely, understanding that sometimes the smallest details could lead to the largest revelations. Meanwhile, Alexander remained in his study, reviewing documents for his latest business venture. He felt a sense of contentment he hadn't experienced in years. The engagement, the celebrations. The feeling that his life had finally reached a level of fulfillment was intoxicating. He thought about the future, the plans he wanted to make with Isabella, and the family they might build together. In his mind, everything was aligned perfectly, like a puzzle finally coming together. But Maria's instincts told a different story. She had learned over the years that appearances could be deceiving, that even the most polished and sophisticated people could harbor secrets. And while Alexander's attention was consumed by the excitement of love and anticipation, Maria remained quietly vigilant, aware that her role in the household was not just to serve but to protect, to notice and to act if necessary. As the night deepened, Maria returned to her duties but kept her mind alert. She didn't know exactly what to expect, only that something about Isabella's behavior felt off. She reminded herself that caution was important and that sometimes it was the quietest observations that mattered the most. Alexander, for his part, continued to dream of a perfect future, unaware that the first threads of a complicated story were already beginning to unravel, quietly in the corners of his grand home. And so, the house settled into silence. Alexander slept soundly, wrapped in the comfort of what he believed was a flawless engagement. Maria, however, remained alert, her mind a mixture of loyalty, concern, and curiosity. She had a feeling that life, even in the most luxurious settings, could change in an instant. And little did anyone know that change was already beginning, waiting quietly in the hidden spaces of the mansion, ready to reveal secrets that would shock. Alexander to his core, Maria could not stop thinking about the strange moment. She had seen Isabella heading toward the basement. It was unusual for anyone to wander down there without a reason, especially Isabella, who always appeared so calm and in control. That night, after finishing her chores, Maria found herself near the basement door again. She paused, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator in the lower level of the house. Something about it drew her closer, a mix of curiosity and unease. She knew she had to be careful. Alexander trusted both her discretion and her judgment, and she had always respected the boundaries of the household. But instinct told her that there was more to Isabella than met the eye. Taking a deep breath, Maria decided she would investigate in small steps, observing without being noticed. She didn't want to act impulsively, knowing that rushing could lead to mistakes. The next day, she noticed Isabella spending more time near the basement, seemingly occupied with tasks that weren't necessary. Maria's suspicion grew when she caught Isabella looking over her shoulder, as if worried someone might be watching. There was a tension in the air that day that Maria had not felt before. She couldn't explain it, but it was enough to keep her on edge. That evening, after the household had quieted down, Maria made her way to the basement once more. This time, she allowed herself to explore a little further. The basement was dimly lit and surprisingly large, filled with shelves of stored items, tools, and a few old pieces of furniture. It was mostly ordinary, but Maria's eyes were drawn to an old freezer tucked in a corner. Unlike the other appliances, this one seemed out of place. It was older, larger, and had a small lock on it. It didn't belong among the other equipment, and it wasn't something Alexander had mentioned storing. Maria's heart raced as she approached it. She knew opening it without permission might be risky, but the pull of curiosity was too strong. She carefully examined the lock, noting that it was a simple mechanism. After a few moments of hesitation, she found that it was not difficult to open. With cautious hands, she lifted the lid, expecting to find some old food or forgotten belongings. What she saw instead made her step back in shock. Inside the freezer were several items carefully packed and labeled in a way that suggested someone had gone to great lengths to preserve them. There were sealed boxes, wrapped objects, and what appeared to be personal documents. Each item was organized meticulously, and it was clear that they had been placed there with intent. Maria could feel a chill run down her spine. She realized this was not ordinary storage. There was something secretive about it. Something Isabella had gone to great lengths to hide. Maria reached for one of the boxes, opening it slowly. Inside were documents, photographs, and personal items that clearly didn't belong in a regular household freezer. They hinted at a life Isabella had kept hidden. A life that involved connections and actions far removed from the elegant image she projected. Maria carefully examined a few of the papers, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Each piece of evidence seemed more disturbing than the last, suggesting a side of Isabella that Alexander had never seen. Maria's mind raced as she considered her next steps. She knew she couldn't ignore what she had found, but she also knew she needed proof before confronting anyone. Alexander had trusted her for years, and she had always respected that trust. Yet now, she faced a situation where withholding information could have serious consequences. The sense of responsibility weighed heavily on her. She decided to document what she had found, making careful notes and photographing the contents with her phone. It was risky, but she needed evidence she could rely on. Over the next few days, Maria observed Isabella more closely. The fiancée seemed even more secretive, taking sudden trips to the basement and carrying small packages that she carefully hid from view. Maria's suspicion grew, and she began noticing inconsistencies in Isabella's stories about her past. There were gaps, details that didn't add up, and a level of secrecy that no ordinary person would maintain. Maria realized that Isabella's carefully crafted persona was only part of the story. Maria decided it was time to take a small but decisive step. She waited until Alexander was away on a business trip and then returned to the basement. This time, she examined every corner, every shelf, and every hidden compartment. She discovered additional boxes and folders tucked away behind the freezer, carefully concealed. Each item seemed to reveal more about Isabella's hidden life documents that suggested dealings and connections that were unusual, even suspicious. Maria's unease deepened, but she knew she had to continue. She couldn't turn away now. The more Maria uncovered, the more she realized how carefully Isabella had constructed her secret life. It was meticulous, deliberate, and clearly meant to remain hidden. There were hints of legal and financial matters that could become problematic if revealed. Some items even suggested potential risks for Alexander, though it was unclear how much he might already know. Maria's sense of urgency increased. She understood that this wasn't just a matter of curiosity anymore. It was a situation that could have real consequences. One evening, after organizing and documenting everything she could, Maria sat in the basement in quiet thought. She considered the possibility of confronting Alexander immediately, but she knew he might react with disbelief or anger without seeing the evidence for himself. She needed a plan, a careful approach that would protect both him and herself. Maria was used to navigating delicate situations, and she relied on her intuition to guide her. She decided that the next step would be to share her findings in a controlled and thoughtful way, ensuring that Alexander understood the gravity of the situation. As she worked, Maria also reflected on Isabella herself. From the moment she had first entered the mansion, Isabella had carried herself with elegance and poise, but there had always been an air of mystery. Maria realized that the fiancé's charm had masked a much more complicated reality. It was a reminder that appearances could be deceiving, and even the most confident and sophisticated people could hide aspects of themselves that no one expected. Maria felt a mixture of sadness and determination. She didn't dislike Isabella, but she knew the truth had to be revealed for the sake of everyone involved. The following day, Maria observed Isabella moving about the house. Unaware that her secrets were being pieced together, she noticed Isabella handling items with care, speaking on the phone in hushed tones, and occasionally glancing toward the basement as if checking for intruders. Maria felt a growing sense of urgency. She knew that time was crucial. If Isabella sensed that her hidden life was being discovered, she might take steps to protect herself or destroy the evidence. Maria had to act carefully but decisively. Later that evening, Maria finally approached Alexander. She waited until he was seated in his study, reviewing business documents, and then gently informed him that she had come across something unusual in the basement. Alexander looked up, puzzled, and initially thought Maria was exaggerating. But her serious tone and measured explanation caught his attention. Maria showed him the first set of documents and photographs, carefully explaining what she had found and why it concerned her. Alexander's expression shifted from confusion to shock as he examined the evidence. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. Isabella, the fiancée he had trusted completely, had a side of her life that he had never imagined. The careful, deliberate way she had hidden her activities was shocking. Alexander felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. He had believed in Isabella wholeheartedly, and now the foundation of that trust seemed to crumble before him. Maria watched him closely, ready to provide support and guidance as he processed the revelation. Over the next several hours, Alexander and Maria went through each item in detail. They discussed the possible implications, trying to understand what Isabella's secret life meant for him personally and professionally. Alexander realized that he needed to approach the situation with caution. While he was angry and hurt, he also understood the importance of handling matters carefully to avoid unnecessary complications. Maria provided calm, clear advice, helping him think through each step logically and strategically. As the night wore on, Alexander felt a sense of disbelief that would not easily fade. He had thought he knew Isabella completely, but now he realized that appearances could be dangerously deceptive. Maria's diligence had uncovered a truth that he could not ignore. While he wrestled with feelings of betrayal and confusion, he also recognized the value of having someone as perceptive and loyal as Maria by his side. Her instincts and careful observation had prevented him from potentially walking blindly into a situation that could have caused far greater harm by the early hours of the morning. Alexander had made a quiet decision. He would confront Isabella, but he would do so on his own terms. With the full knowledge of her actions and with careful planning, he knew that emotions would run high and he needed to be prepared for anything. Maria's role would remain supportive, offering guidance and ensuring that he stayed grounded throughout what promised to be a difficult confrontation. In the following days, the mansion carried a tense atmosphere. Isabella moved about with her usual grace, unaware that her carefully hidden life was no longer a secret. Alexander watched her closely, trying to gauge her reactions and plan his approach. Maria continued her duties, maintaining her calm and measured presence, quietly monitoring any further suspicious activity. The sense of suspense was palpable, a silent tension that hung in the air, signaling that life within the mansion was about to change dramatically. Maria reflected on the events that had unfolded so far. She understood that discovery was only the first step. What followed would require courage, patience, and careful thinking. Alexander's world, once orderly and controlled, was now facing a challenge that demanded more than just wealth or influence. It required insight, careful observation, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Maria felt a quiet determination to help him navigate the situation, knowing that the choices made in the coming days would shape the future of everyone involved. And so, the stage was set. The quiet basement, once a place of ordinary storage, had revealed secrets that threatened to disrupt the carefully curated life Alexander had built. Maria's vigilance had uncovered the first clues. Alexander now faced the reality of deception within the walls of his own home. The mansion, with all its luxury and elegance, had become a place of suspense, where hidden truths waited to surface, and the next chapter of a complicated story was about to begin. Alexander spent the next morning in quiet reflection. The evidence Maria had shown him the previous night weighed heavily on his mind. Isabella had been someone he trusted completely, someone he thought he understood. But the documents, photographs, and carefully hidden items in the basement told a different story. For the first time in years, he felt uncertainty creeping into his usually orderly life. He paced in his study, thinking about the engagement, the way Isabella had charmed everyone around her, and how convincingly she had maintained her composure. It was hard to believe that someone so seemingly perfect could hide a secret life beneath the surface. Alexander realized that he had been blinded by appearances, by the elegance and sophistication that Isabella displayed so effortlessly. Maria, sensing his inner turmoil, remained quietly nearby. She didn't intrude, but her calm presence was reassuring. She had always been a steady influence in the household. And now, more than ever, Alexander needed someone who could offer clarity without judgment. He finally spoke, sharing his thoughts aloud. Trying to make sense of the betrayal he felt. "I don't understand how she could have done this," Alexander said, his voice tense. "I thought I knew her. I thought I could trust her completely. How could someone be so careful, so deliberate, and still be hiding all of this?" Maria nodded, her expression serious. "Sometimes people show only what they want others to see. It doesn't make it right, but it explains why it was so easy for her to hide. What matters now is how you respond. You can't ignore it, and you can't rush into a confrontation without being prepared." Alexander knew she was right. Acting on impulse could lead to mistakes, and Isabella had proven herself to be cunning. He needed a plan, a way to approach the situation that would give him the upper hand. He spent the day reviewing the evidence, cataloging everything Maria had collected, and thinking about the questions he needed to ask Isabella when the time came. Later that afternoon, Isabella returned from a brief trip into the city. She appeared as graceful and composed as ever, smiling warmly at Alexander as she entered the mansion. But he could barely meet her gaze without remembering the hidden life Maria had uncovered. The contrast between her outward charm and the hidden reality was almost overwhelming. He decided to wait until the evening to confront her. He wanted to do it privately, away from staff and guests, where they could speak openly without interruptions. All day, he observed her subtle movements, the way she interacted with the house and its occupants. Maria stayed nearby but unobtrusive, ready to support him if needed. When the evening arrived, Alexander invited Isabella to join him in the study. She accepted without hesitation, smiling as if nothing were amiss. But as soon as they were alone, Alexander felt a knot form in his stomach. He had rehearsed what he would say, how he would address the situation calmly and firmly. But the reality of facing her in person was daunting. "Isabella," he began, his voice steady but firm, "there's something I need to discuss with you. Something important that I've discovered." She tilted her head slightly, curiosity and concern flickering across her face. "What is it?" she asked, her tone polite but guarded. Alexander took a deep breath, holding up the documents Maria had photographed. "I found these in the basement. Can you explain why you have a hidden compartment filled with items and documents that you've kept from me?" For a moment, Isabella's composure faltered. She looked at him with an expression that was almost unreadable, and Alexander could feel the tension between them grow. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers lightly touching the edge of the table, as if considering her next move carefully. After a few seconds of silence, she spoke, her voice calm but measured. "Alexander, I can explain. There's more to my past than I've shared with anyone. These items, they were meant to protect me. I never intended for you to see them, and I certainly never wanted to harm you."
Alexander's mind raced.
The explanation seemed plausible on the surface, but the careful construction of her secret life, the lengths she had gone to hide it, the potential risks involved, all made him skeptical. "Protect you from what?" he asked, leaning forward. "And why hide it in a freezer in my basement? Why all the secrecy?" Isabella hesitated, then sighed. "There were people in my life I couldn't trust, threats I had to guard against. The freezer, the hidden documents, the way I organized everything, it was all a precaution. I wanted to maintain my life here with you, without the shadows of my past interfering." Alexander listened, torn between anger and disbelief. The idea that she had lived a hidden life to protect herself was understandable to some extent, but the deception still cut deeply. "You trusted no one," he said quietly. "Not even me. You kept me in the dark, even though we were planning a life together." Isabella's eyes softened, a trace of regret flickering across her face. "I didn't know how to tell you. I feared that if you knew the truth, it would ruin everything between us. I wanted you in my life, and I thought this was the only way to keep it." Alexander shook his head, struggling to process the mixture of honesty and deception. "You built a life on lies, Isabella. You hid so much from me that I don't even know where to start. How can I trust anything you say now?" Her gaze dropped, and she spoke softly. "I understand why you feel that way. I'm asking for a chance to explain. To make you understand that it wasn't about betraying you, it was about surviving my past while building a future with you." Alexander paused, weighing her words carefully. There was a sincerity in her voice, but he had learned that appearances could be deceiving. He thought about Maria, her calm and steady presence, and the evidence she had collected. The reality of Isabella's deception was undeniable. He needed to find a way to navigate this without letting emotion cloud his judgment. "Isabella, I need you to be completely honest with me," he said. "Every detail, no more hiding. No more secrets. I need to understand who you really are and what you've been involved in." Isabella nodded slowly. "I will tell you everything, Alexander. I promise." What followed was hours of conversation, with Isabella recounting parts of her life she had never shared. She spoke of challenges, fears, and people she had tried to protect herself from. Some of the stories were plausible, others troubling, but the pattern of secrecy was clear. Alexander listened intently, taking notes in his mind, trying to separate fact from interpretation. He asked questions, challenged inconsistencies, and sought clarity on matters that could affect him or his life directly. As the night deepened, Alexander began to see the extent of Isabella's meticulous planning. Everything in the basement, every hidden document and item, had been carefully arranged to minimize risk. Her life had been complicated, filled with situations that required extreme caution. But the deception and secrecy remained difficult to accept. He realized that, while some of her actions were understandable in context, the impact on their relationship was significant. Maria, who had remained nearby at a discreet distance, observed the confrontation from the doorway. She noticed the tension, the careful exchange of words, and the subtle shifts in both Alexander and Isabella's expressions. She knew that the situation required careful handling. Her role was not to intervene, but to support Alexander, to provide clarity and guidance when needed. The trust Alexander placed in her was evident, and she remained ready to assist in whatever way was necessary. By the early hours of the morning, the confrontation had revealed more than Alexander had anticipated. Isabella had admitted to a life of careful planning, secrecy, and protection. But the motivations and risks behind her actions were now clearer. Alexander understood that while betrayal had occurred, it was not entirely malicious. There had been fear, caution, and a desire to maintain control over her own circumstances. He sat back in his chair, exhaustion and relief mingling in his mind. The confrontation had been difficult, emotional, and revealing, but it had provided a necessary understanding. He still struggled with feelings of anger and disappointment, but he also recognized the complexity of Isabella's life and the need for careful consideration in determining what steps to take next. Isabella, for her part, remained composed, yet visibly anxious. She understood that her actions had consequences and that rebuilding trust would require time, honesty, and patience. She had hoped that her explanations would provide some clarity. And while Alexander's response was measured, she sensed the weight of his disappointment and the challenge of moving forward. As dawn approached, Alexander and Isabella reached a tentative understanding. There would need to be changes, boundaries, and a commitment to transparency if their relationship were to continue. Maria quietly withdrew to her duties. Satisfied that she had provided the necessary support and that Alexander was navigating the situation with wisdom and caution, the mansion, once a place of seamless luxury and order, now carried the echoes of a profound confrontation. Hidden truths had emerged, and the careful construction of appearances had been challenged. Alexander knew that the days ahead would require vigilance, reflection, and difficult decisions. But he also recognized the value of clarity, honesty, and careful observation as he moved through the rest of the day. Alexander felt a mixture of emotions, anger, relief, curiosity, and determination. He understood that the confrontation had been only the beginning. The journey of understanding, navigating the consequences, and deciding the future of his relationship with Isabella was just beginning. Maria's role, steady and observant, remained critical. Together, they would face the aftermath of the revelations. With careful thought guiding their every step, Alexander could hardly sleep that night. The confrontation with Isabella had left him exhausted but unable to stop thinking. Every detail she had revealed weighed heavily on him, from the hidden compartments to the carefully preserved documents. While he understood her reasons in part, the depth of her deception was difficult to digest. He had trusted her implicitly, and now he realized that he had been living with someone who had carefully hidden entire chapters of her life from him. The next morning, Alexander decided he needed to learn more. He couldn't rely solely on Isabella's explanations, no matter how convincing they seemed. Maria, as always, offered her steady support, suggesting they review the evidence again and look for any details that might have been overlooked. Alexander agreed, and together they went through the documents, photographs, and personal items once more, searching for clarity as they examined the materials. They uncovered additional layers of Isabella's hidden life. There were financial records that didn't match her stories, notes and letters indicating relationships with people Alexander had never known about, and items that suggested she had been involved in matters far more complex than she had admitted. Each discovery added to Alexander's sense of betrayal, but it also reinforced the need for caution. Isabella's meticulous nature had protected her for years, and Alexander realized that rushing decisions could make the situation worse. Maria reminded him gently, "We need to understand the full picture before we take any action. She might have had reasons we can't see yet, but that doesn't mean her actions aren't serious. Let's proceed carefully." Alexander nodded. Her words were wise. He had learned over the years that patience and observation often revealed more than confrontation alone. He resolved to approach Isabella again, this time armed with questions that would require honesty and accountability. He needed to see how far her secrets extended, and whether she was capable of maintaining trust moving forward. When Isabella returned later that afternoon, Alexander called her into the study. He felt a mix of anger and apprehension as she entered, her expression calm but cautious. She seemed aware that her secrets were slowly being unraveled. Yet there was a quiet confidence in her demeanor that suggested she had anticipated this moment. "Alexander," she said softly, "I know you have more questions." "I'm ready to answer them," he nodded, his eyes fixed on hers. "Isabella, there are things we need to go over. The documents, the letters, the hidden items, they raise serious questions. I need you to tell me everything. No more half-truths, no more hiding. This is your chance to be completely honest." Isabella took a deep breath and began to explain further. She spoke of past relationships that had forced her to be cautious, of threats and situations that required secrecy, and of the lengths she had gone to in order to protect herself and the life she hoped to build with Alexander. She admitted that some of her actions had been extreme, that the hidden freezer and documents were part of a system she had created to feel safe. Alexander listened, trying to separate emotion from fact, while Maria observed quietly, noting the nuances in Isabella's tone and body language. Despite Isabella's explanations, Alexander could not ignore the impact of her deception. He realized that even though she had acted out of fear and caution, the trust between them had been fundamentally damaged. He felt a growing sense of disappointment, mixed with the sadness of recognizing how easily appearances could mislead. Maria offered quiet guidance, helping him process his feelings and plan the next steps. Over the following days, Alexander decided to take a closer look at Isabella's hidden connections. He wanted to understand the full extent of her secret life and the potential risks it posed. Maria assisted him in reviewing documents and cross-referencing details. They discovered patterns that suggested Isabella had maintained her secrecy for a long time, carefully managing every interaction to avoid suspicion. Some of the records indicated financial arrangements and relationships that could have serious consequences if left unchecked. Alexander realized that he needed to confront the reality of the situation. Isabella's actions had created a web of complexity that extended beyond personal deception. There were practical implications for his life, his business, and even his reputation. He felt a mix of frustration and determination. While he could empathize with her fears, he could not ignore the potential fallout from her choices. One evening, confronted Isabella again, seeking clarity and accountability. This conversation was more intense than the previous ones. Alexander asked pointed questions about each discovery, seeking to understand motivations, connections, and the extent of her secrecy. Isabella responded with honesty, acknowledging her actions and the reasons behind them, while also expressing regret for the pain and confusion she had caused. "You have to understand, Alexander," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I never meant for this to hurt you. I wanted to protect myself and, in a way, protect you from complications. I thought I could manage everything on my own, and I was wrong." Alexander listened, feeling a mix of anger and empathy. He understood the fear that had driven her, but he also recognized the consequences of her choices. The conversation stretched late into the night, with both of them exploring difficult questions and emotions. By the end, Alexander felt a cautious sense of understanding, but he knew that trust would need to be rebuilt over time. If at all, Maria continued to play a supportive role, ensuring that Alexander remained grounded and thoughtful. She reminded him of the importance of patience and careful decision-making. Her presence provided a sense of stability in a situation that was emotionally charged and unpredictable. Alexander relied on her insight to navigate the complexities of Isabella's hidden life, understanding that moving too quickly could lead to mistakes. As the days turned into a week, Alexander and Maria began to organize the evidence and plan for the future. They discussed potential risks, ways to protect Alexander's interests, strategies for addressing the situation with Isabella. Each step was taken with caution, reflecting a deliberate approach that prioritized clarity and foresight. Alexander realized that handling the fallout from Isabella's secrets required more than emotion. It required careful thought and planning. During this time, Isabella began to show signs of reflection and remorse. She understood the impact of her actions and seemed willing to cooperate in addressing the consequences. While the path to rebuilding trust was uncertain, there were moments of sincerity and openness that suggested she was committed to being honest moving forward. Alexander observed her behavior closely, noting both the changes and the lingering tensions. Maria, observing the dynamic, felt a quiet satisfaction. Her instincts had been correct from the start. Her careful approach had helped Alexander navigate a difficult situation. She continued to monitor developments, providing support without overstepping boundaries, ensuring that Alexander could make informed decisions at every stage. Her loyalty and perceptiveness were invaluable. Particularly in a situation as delicate and emotionally charged as this, Alexander, though still hurt and cautious, began to see a path forward. He understood that Isabella's secrecy had created challenges that could not be ignored. But he also recognized the possibility of learning from the experience. He reflected on the importance of trust, transparency, and vigilance in his relationships. The revelations had shaken him, but they had also reinforced the value of careful observation and critical thinking. As the mansion settled into a quieter rhythm, the lessons of the past days remained. Alexander continued to navigate the aftermath of Isabella's hidden life with thoughtfulness and caution. He understood that the future was uncertain, but he felt more prepared to face it with clarity and a renewed sense of awareness. Maria remained by his side, her steady presence a reminder that careful observation and loyalty were essential in times of uncertainty. By the end of the week, Alexander had reached a tentative understanding with Isabella. While the trust between them had been damaged, there was now a foundation for transparency and accountability. The mansion, once a place of seamless luxury, had become a setting for reflection, growth, and the careful navigation of complex human emotions. Alexander realized that the journey ahead would require patience, honesty, and vigilance, but he felt ready to face the challenges with the guidance and support of those he trusted most. Through it all, Alexander learned an important truth: appearances could be deceiving, and even the most polished lives could hide complex realities. The revelations had been difficult, but they had also provided an opportunity for growth, understanding, and careful decision-making. As he moved forward, he carried with him a renewed sense of clarity, a commitment to vigilance, and the knowledge that trusts, once broken, required effort, patience, and courage to rebuild. The days that followed the confrontation were tense and quiet in the mansion. Alexander moved through his home with a careful awareness, observing Isabella's actions while considering his own next steps. He had spent countless hours with Maria, reviewing evidence and understanding the extent of Isabella's hidden life. Now the challenge was deciding what to do with that knowledge and how to move forward. The feelings of betrayal were still strong, but Alexander knew that clarity and careful thought were essential.